teenage girl takes on a real estate tycoon and wins. But when threats, counter lawsuits, and midnight whistleblowers follow, she realizes the courtroom was just the beginning. This isn't just a fight for housing justice. It's war. And Avery Daniels? She's not backing down. Avery Daniels never saw herself as special, even though everyone around her said otherwise. At 17, she lived with her grandmother Evelyn in a small, memory-filled house in the suburbs of Oak Ridge, Maryland. Avery spent most of her free time reading case law and state statutes as if they were comic books. She didn't care about titles or media attention, only about justice. That afternoon, after school, Avery and her grandmother went grocery shopping at a small corner store on Maple Street. While waiting in line to check out, they overheard a heated exchange at the register up front. A woman in her 30s, with warm brown skin and puffy red eyes, was trembling as she explained to the cashier that she was about to be evicted. Her name was Lena Morales, a night shift nurse and single mother of 2. "I've paid my rent on time every month," she sobbed. "But Mr. Trent says I broke the lease by letting outsiders stay. I don't have anyone. It was just my mom, watching the kids for a few days while I was working." Avery and Evelyn stood still, silently listening. As they left the store, Avery paused at the door, her eyes following Lena as she struggled to push her shopping cart toward the parking lot, weighed down by 2 heavy bags of rice. A flicker of injustice had struck something deep within her, the part that always lit up when someone was being wronged. "She needs help?" Avery said quietly. "I know what you're thinking," Evelyn replied gently. "But remember, justice isn't as simple as the words in a book." Avery didn't answer. That night, she knocked on Lena's apartment door with a folder in hand. "May I take a look at your lease agreement?" Avery asked, her voice calm but unwavering. Lena hesitated, then nodded. 3 hours later, Avery had reviewed the entire lease, payment records, email correspondence, and even handwritten notes Lena had jotted down out of habit. And she discovered something. Douglas Trent, the landlord, had cited a vague clause, but was applying it entirely wrong in an attempt to force Lena out. "He has no legal ground," Avery declared. "I'm going to help you. We'll send him a formal legal warning. If he still tries to evict you, we'll take it to court." Lena looked at the teenage girl standing before her, torn between fear and doubt. "You're only 17? Avery smiled. "I get that a lot. Trust me, I don't talk legal unless I know exactly what I'm doing." That's how Avery Daniels' first case began. Not in some grand courtroom, but at a kitchen table under a warm overhead light, where a teenager decided that justice didn't have to wait for adulthood. Courtroom 3 of the Oak Ridge District Civil Courthouse fell into a tense, doubtful silence as Avery Daniels rose from the plaintiff's bench. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, her hair neatly tied back in a bun, she looked more like a first-year law student than the person about to shift the entire course of the case. Judge Walter Granger, known for his gruff courtroom demeanor and thinly veiled bias, leaned back in his chair, his eyes barely concealing contempt. "And who might you be in this matter?" he asked, drawing out the words as though forced to entertain a joke. Avery didn't flinch. Avery Daniels, legal representative for the plaintiff, Ms. Lena Morales, under the self-representation clause in civil court. Granger scoffed. "Legal representative? You're not even old enough to vote, Ms. Daniels. This isn't a high school debate team." A few scattered chuckles came from the gallery, but Avery held her gaze steady. She gently placed her hand on the folder in front of her, brown eyes gleaming with a kind of quiet confidence rare in someone only 17. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, her voice firm and articulate, "I have the legal right to represent the plaintiff under the revised Civil Rights Act, Amendment 7, which guarantees citizens the right to defend themselves in civil disputes if they cannot afford counsel." Granger snorted. "What is this, a sociology class presentation?" Avery stepped forward toward the lectern, her eyes locked on his. "No, Your Honor. That was a direct quote from Maryland State Law, Section 28-3B. And if the court permits, I'd like to present the legal basis for why Mr. Douglas Trent's lawsuit is not only illegitimate, but shows signs of systemic fraud." The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Richard Kessler, The attorney representing Douglas Trent sat across from her, brow furrowed, no longer finding the situation amusing. Granger looked ready to cut her off, but Avery continued, already opening the folder and presenting a thick stack of documents. These are copies of the lease agreement, proof of full rent payments for the past 18 months, and evidence that Mr. Trent has used similar intimidation tactics against at least 3 other tenants, accusing them of lease violations to force evictions without going through legal procedure. A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Judge Granger stiffened in his chair. I need these documents authenticated," he said, his voice tightening. "Of course, Your Honor." Avery pulled out a large envelope and handed it to the court clerk. Each piece of evidence includes verification codes and digital authentication, certified by an independent legal specialist. No one was laughing now. Even Granger had lost his usual sneer. He turned the pages in silence, lips pressed into a tight line. "Who are you?" "Really?" he asked, his voice no longer mocking for the first time. Avery looked him straight in the eye and gently placed a sheet of paper on the bench. "My name is Avery Daniels. I passed the Maryland State Bar exam at the age of 16, and I'm not here to test my abilities. I'm here to defend a single mother from a man who's abusing his power." When she stepped out of the courtroom that afternoon, Avery Daniels didn't feel relief, despite having silenced the entire room with her sharp rebuttal. On the contrary, she felt the narrowing of eyes behind her back, watching, memorizing, scrutinizing. And she knew Douglas Trent wasn't the kind of man to take defeat lying down. The next morning, while Avery was helping Grandma Evelyn make breakfast, her phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen. She frowned and picked up. "Miss Daniels? This is Sergeant Caleb Bennett from the Oak Ridge Police Department. We need you to come in for questioning related to the civil case you're involved in." Avery tightened her grip on the phone. "What am I being accused of, officer?" "There are no formal charges at this time, but a party has filed a complaint alleging you submitted falsified documents and forged evidence in court." She knew instantly who was behind it. At the station, Avery was led into a small room with gray walls and a cold metal table. Sergeant Caleb and another officer, Jordan Miles, entered carrying a folder. "We've received several documents submitted by Mr. Douglas Trent," Caleb began, his tone laced with a feigned neutrality. "Included are financial statements suggesting that Ms. Morales accepted undeclared cash payments, along with a letter from an anonymous witness accusing you of tampering with the lease agreement." Avery didn't blink. "I have the original lease in my possession, along with its digital verification chain and the date of execution. I also have a forensic digital report from an independent legal expert confirming that every document I submitted is legitimate. Can you provide those materials?" Jordan asked. "I brought them with me," Avery replied, opening her case and pulling out a neatly organized file, each section clearly labeled. Caleb and Jordan read in silence. The atmosphere in the room began to shift. Jordan let out a low whistle as he reached the section containing digital verification codes. "A 17-year-old who knows how to set up a verification chain like this?" he asked, clearly impressed. Avery answered crisply, "I didn't create it. I verified it." There's an important distinction. After 45 minutes of cross-checking, Caleb stood and closed the file. "Miss Daniels, thank you for your cooperation. We'll continue investigating the origin of the documents Mr. Trent submitted. For now, you're no longer under review." As she stepped out of the station, Avery knew one thing. This wasn't a small case anymore. It was a real fight, and the other side had just started playing dirty. And just as Grandma Evelyn once told her, when the powerful start to cheat, that's when you know they're afraid. Avery tightened the strap of her bag and walked forward, steady and sure. The game had just leveled up. That evening, in Avery's small upstairs bedroom at Evelyn's house, the glow of her laptop screen lit up her focused face. Her eyes were wide, her fingers flying across the keyboard, following real-time instructions from Jalen Pierce, an older friend and current cybersecurity student at the University of Maryland. They sat across from each other, surrounded by stacks of case files, bank statements, and sticky notes plastered all over the walls. "There it is," Jalen whispered, pointing at the screen. Harmony Solutions is just a shell. It's owned by a parent company called Trivex Holdings. And guess who the CEO is? Avery tilted her head slightly, her instincts already on alert. Douglas Trent. Bingo, Jalen confirmed. And that's not all. Trivex Holdings has been behind at least 3 evictions under investigation for financial fraud in the past year. No one caught on because the company name keeps changing. Avery drew a deep breath. If we can prove that Harmony is a shell company Trent created to fabricate documentation, then everything he submitted in court gets thrown out. Jalen nodded. And if you really want to take him down in one blow, there's something else you should know. I just got an anonymous email from someone who used to work as an accountant for Trent Properties. They claim to have internal records showing Trent made off-the-books payments to silence tenants who threatened to sue. Avery's eyes widened. Are they willing to come forward? Maybe, but they want to meet in person tomorrow night in the parking lot behind the Woodbury bookstore in downtown Oak Ridge. Just you. Avery froze. Meeting a whistleblower in the dark was something she'd only seen in movies. But if what Jalen said was true, this could be the final piece to expose everything. Send the location to my phone, she said after a pause. But I need you to monitor from a distance in case anything goes wrong. Jalen gave a crooked smile. I'll track your GPS and stream your phone camera. You won't be alone. The following night, a light rain fell over Oak Ridge. Street lights shimmered across the wet pavement. Avery stepped out of the Uber in a dark coat, her earbuds already in, Jalen listening on the other end. A middle-aged woman stood waiting near an old minivan. She handed Avery a folder. Inside were bank transfer records from Trent's account to several fake witnesses. Don't let him silence anyone else, the woman said softly, then turned and disappeared into the night. As Avery returned to the car, her heart pounded, not from fear, but from certainty. The game had shifted, and when the trial resumed, the truth would finally have its say. Just 3 days after Avery Daniels submitted evidence of Douglas Trent's fraudulent activities, she received a notice from a court. Trent had filed a countersuit against her and Lena Morales for defamation, seeking $250,000 in damages. In the living room of Grandma Evelyn's house, Avery sat across from Lena, both holding copies of the complaint. He's trying to silence us, Lena said, her voice trembling. Avery nodded. He wants us to be scared and back down. But we won't. At the hearing, Douglas Trent's attorney, Richard Kessler, argued that the accusations made by Avery and Lena had caused severe damage to his client's reputation and financial standing. When it was her turn to speak, Avery rose to her feet, eyes steady. Your Honor, she began, every statement we've made is backed by specific, verified evidence. We are not defaming anyone. We are telling the truth. She presented documentation proving that Trent had used Harmony Solutions as a shell company to conceal illegal financial activity. Furthermore, Avery continued, we have evidence that Mr. Trent made covert payments to silence witnesses. She submitted bank records and the sworn statement of a former accountant from Trent's company who had provided the information. Judge Walter Granger reviewed the documents, his expression growing increasingly serious. Mr. Kessler, he said, does your client have any response to this evidence? Kessler hesitated. Your Honor, we need time to review. Judge Granger raised a hand, cutting him off. This court will recess to evaluate the newly submitted materials. However, let me be clear, if these allegations of document falsification and shell company operations are verified, this defamation suit will be dismissed immediately. The tension in the courtroom thickened as all eyes turned to Kessler. An emergency panel of legal experts was convened within 48 hours to independently assess the evidence submitted by Avery Daniels and Jalen Pierce. 3 days later, court reconvened. Judge Granger sat solemnly, flipping through the findings of the expert review. After reviewing the records, this court finds the evidence provided by the defendants, including metadata, financial analysis, and the established connection between Harmony Ventures and Mr. Douglas Trent, to be credible. On that basis, the court concludes the defamation claim has no legal foundation. He looked directly at Kessler. This case is hereby dismissed. The court will proceed with an investigation into possible criminal misconduct involving Mr. Douglas Trent. The gavel struck the bench. After the ruling, Avery and Lena walked down the gray stone steps of the Oak Ridge District Courthouse, a soft sunlight falling around them. "We did the right thing," Avery said, her voice light as autumn wind, but carrying undeniable weight. Lena turned to her, eyes glistening. "Thank you, Avery. You gave me hope, not just for this case, but for justice itself." Avery smiled, but deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Douglas Trent's shadow stretched far beyond the reach of the courtroom's record. She glanced back at the courthouse, where justice had just spoken, and made herself a promise. She would expose the entire dark network behind that man. From that verdict forward, everything began to change. Ever since Douglas Trent had been exposed in court, Avery Daniels began to feel the weight of pressure, coming not just from the lawsuit, but from the forces behind him. Anonymous messages, strange cars parked outside the house at night. It was enough to make Grandma Evelyn worry. But not Avery. She didn't flinch. One weekend evening, as Avery was leaving the Oak Ridge Law Library, a tall man in a dark gray suit approached her in the parking lot. He didn't need an introduction. She'd seen his name in the files Jalen Pierce had uncovered. Derek Slate, a private investigator once accused of witness intimidation in a major corruption case in Delaware. "You're Avery Daniels?" he asked, his voice flat and cold. Avery nodded without stepping back. "What do you want?" He gave a thin smile. "Just a word of advice. There are places where intelligence won't protect you. And there are people who don't want the truth coming to light. So you're here to threaten me?" Avery shot back, eyes locked on him. "Then here's my advice. Tell Mr. Trent I'm not backing down." Derek stepped closer and whispered, "Sometimes courage only makes people disappear quietly." Avery didn't respond. She simply pulled out her phone, opened the camera, and recorded his face. "Thanks for leaving behind some evidence." He stepped back, his expression unchanged. "Be careful with what you're about to do," he said before turning and walking into the shadows of the lot, vanishing as if he were never there. When Avery got home, she told Grandma Evelyn everything. For the first time, her grandmother looked at her with a blend of pride and deep worry. "You don't have to carry the whole world on your shoulders, Avery," she said softly. "I know, Grandma," Avery whispered. "But if I don't stand up for Lena, who will?" That night, Avery didn't sleep. She sat at her desk, warm lamplight washing over the scattered papers, revisiting every forged document Douglas had submitted. She plotted her next move. She and Jalen coordinated, tracing the digital fingerprints behind each account, each signature. From Slate's silent threat, Avery understood. This was no longer a simple civil case. It was a battle for truth, for justice, and for dignity, something Douglas Trent had trampled long ago. And one thing she knew for sure, she would not be silenced. Not this time. Not ever. Courtroom 3 of the Oak Ridge District Courthouse was packed on Monday morning. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, illuminating the tense faces of everyone involved. Avery Daniels, in her now familiar Navy suit, stood at the podium, gaze unwavering. "Your Honor," she began, voice clear and firm, "we have presented verified evidence of financial fraud and abuse of power by Mr. Douglas Trent. The forged documents, shell corporations, and illicit payments have all been substantiated." Judge Walter Granger gave a firm nod, his expression grave. "Thank you, Ms. Daniels. The court will review the evidence and issue a ruling." The air in the courtroom grew heavy with tension as Judge Granger declared. After a thorough review of the evidence and testimonies, this court concludes that Mr. Douglas Trent has committed serious violations of the law, including financial fraud, document forgery, and abuse of power. The court orders the immediate arrest of Mr. Douglas Trent. A wave of murmurs swept through the room as two officers approached and placed handcuffs on Douglas Trent. He tried to maintain a composed exterior, but panic flashed clearly in his eyes. As the cuffs clicked into place, Douglas snapped. "I object. This is all staged. That girl isn't even a real lawyer. This is a farce. I demand a fair process." His attorney, Richard Kessler, stood up immediately. "Your Honor, we object to the immediate arrest and request a stay to file an appeal. My client remains the plaintiff in a pending defamation case." Judge Granger slammed his gavel forcefully. The defamation case was dismissed last week due to lack of legal merit, as the court clearly ruled. Today's arrest is based on separate criminal findings. Mr. Trent will have the right to defend himself in criminal court, but for now, the arrest order stands and takes effect immediately. He paused, then turned toward the plaintiff's table, where Avery and Lena were seated. As for Ms. Lena Morales, he continued, voice low and solemn, the court finds that she did not violate her lease agreement. The attempted eviction was wrongful and based on falsified evidence. The court orders full reinstatement of the original lease, waives all legal fees, and grants compensation for damages as outlined in the supplemental provisions. Lena held her arms tightly to her chest, eyes shimmering with tears. Avery stood in silence, a wave of relief spreading through her. She turned to Lena Morales, who was now crying softly, overwhelmed. "Thank you again, Avery," Lena whispered. "You brought justice to me and my children." Avery gently squeezed Lena's hand. "This is only the beginning, Ms. Morales. There are still so many others who haven't been heard." She smiled, quiet, proud of what they'd achieved. She knew this was just the first step in a much longer journey, but it was a beginning filled with hope. The first headquarters of Civic Equity Alliance, wasn't in a gleaming office tower, nor did it have a shiny sign. It was a repurposed classroom behind the Oak Ridge Community Center, its paint peeling, its whiteboard still marked with faded ESL notes. But for 17-year-old Avery Daniels, it was the starting point for something far bigger. After her courtroom victory, Avery turned down the glare of the media spotlight. Instead of accepting interview requests for national news outlets, she chose to do something more important: build something. With help from Jalen Pierce, her ever-wired tech friend, and Grandma Evelyn Daniels, who made hot soup for every late-night strategy session, the Civic Equity Alliance was officially born. "It's not about me," Avery said during their first meeting. "It's about people like Ms. Lena, people the system cheated just because they didn't know where to go." Within weeks, CEA had received over 40 requests for help, ranging from an immigrant family evicted for not speaking fluent English to an 82-year-old man whose rent was illegally increased. Each case was treated like a battle, with files, data, and sharp legal strategy. The press began to take notice, this time for the right reasons. An article in the Baltimore Journal titled "The Teen Lawyer Who Didn't Stop at the Courthouse" went viral, and CEA's temporary office phone rang all night. Volunteer law students from nearby universities reached out, eager to help. An anonymous donor sent a check for $50,000 with a simple note: "Thank you for making us believe in the law again." Late one evening, as Avery was reorganizing files, Lena walked in with her 2 young children trailing behind. "I just wanted to say thank you," Lena said, eyes misting over. "You didn't just save my family. You're saving a whole community." Avery looked at them. 3 people once threatened with erasure, now standing tall in their place in the world. And in that moment, she understood. Civic Equity Alliance wasn't just an organization. It was a declaration that no one is too small to speak up, and no power is too big to silence justice. One ordinary evening, as Avery worked late on active cases at CEA, a message from Jalen Pierce came in just before midnight. "Avery, you need to see this. A real estate deal is being fast-tracked, and the man behind it is Douglas Trent." Avery jumped from her wooden chair at the Civic Equity Alliance office. Her laptop lit up with a digital map. Birchwood, a neighborhood home to more than 200 low-income families, was marked for acquisition and redevelopment into a high-end commercial complex. The name at the top of the investor list: Brightwell Strategies, LLC. "Brightwell," Avery murmured. "That's one of Douglas Trent's shell companies. He's not done yet." The next morning, Avery called an emergency meeting at CEA. "If we don't stop this deal," she told the room, her eyes sweeping across tired but determined faces, "over 200 families will lose their homes. They can't fight the system alone, but we can. Jalen flipped open his laptop and shared the files he'd compiled. Falsified valuation documents, forged zoning permits, and, most damning of all, evidence that Brightwell was deliberately suppressing an independent environmental report. They're using Trent's exact playbook, Jalen said. Only this time, it's 10 times bigger. Avery knew they had to act fast, not just to stop it, but to expose the entire scheme. They contacted local journalists, sent a formal request for investigation to the Oak Ridge mayor's office, and began planning a massive community meeting right in the heart of Birchwood. By Saturday night, more than 300 people packed into the local church hall, with many standing outside the doors. Avery stepped onto the makeshift stage, microphone trembling slightly in her hand, but her voice came through steady and bold. No one has the right to erase a community for profit. We've uncovered the truth, and tonight, you're going to see it. Jalen fired up the projector. Slide after slide appeared before the crowd. False financial projections, internal emails between Trent and investors. The room erupted. An elderly woman wept. A young man shouted, "We have to fight back." The next morning, under mounting pressure from the public, the media, and CEA, the city of Oak Ridge announced an immediate suspension of the entire Brightwell development deal. A week later, the Department of Justice opened a federal investigation into Douglas Trent's fraudulent land acquisitions. In the small community center office, Avery stared at the Birchwood map pinned to the wall, each green representing a home that had been saved. She turned to Jalen and smiled. This time, she said, he didn't lose to the law. He lost to an entire community that stood up. One autumn morning, sunlight spilled through the window of the Civic Equity Alliance headquarters in Oak Ridge, Maryland. Avery Daniels, now 18, sat at a battered wooden desk, flipping through letters of gratitude sent from across the country. There were notes from a single mother in Detroit, an immigrant family in El Paso, and a 14-year-old boy from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who wrote that he wanted to study law because of Miss Avery. On the wall beside her hung photographs marking her relentless journey. Her first courtroom victory with Lena Morales. The moment Douglas Trent was arrested. The Birchwood Town Hall. Her first speech at the National Housing Justice Conference in New York. Beneath each photo, a handwritten caption by Avery. Justice doesn't come from silence. It comes from action. Civic Equity Alliance had now expanded into 8 states, with hundreds of volunteers, lawyers, and young students. They offered more than legal aid. They empowered communities, investigated predatory housing practices, and trained the next generation of leaders. One Friday afternoon, Avery appeared on a national television program. The host asked, "You started as a teenager living with your grandmother in Oak Ridge. Now you're seen as a symbol for the housing justice movement. What does that feel like?" Avery smiled softly, her eyes fixed on the camera. "To be honest, I didn't set out to become a symbol. I saw someone being treated unfairly, and I couldn't turn away. If I could stand up, then anyone can. Justice has no age, and it begins the moment you believe that truth, no matter how quiet, still has a voice." The studio erupted in applause. But Avery knew, behind the stage lights, reality still had cracks to mend. That night, she returned to the modest apartment she still rented. She stepped out onto the rooftop, where she could see the neighborhoods that had once been on the brink of erasure by greed. The wind was cold, but Avery stood tall, eyes fixed on the horizon. She didn't know what challenges tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. As long as even one person was forced from their home unjustly, this fight wasn't over. And Avery Daniels would keep fighting, not just with her mind, but with the unshakable resilience of a generation that refuses to be silenced.